Jake's shuttle drifted through space toward the asteroid field that Earth had been granted in the negotiations. The small ship moved slowly compared to the sleek alien vessels that flashed past on their way to claim the richer territories. Other delegates were already beginning their advanced orbital surveys, while Jake's primitive craft took hours to cover the same distance. The new frontier was everything the aliens expected from human technology. No energy shields protected it from space debris. No artificial gravity kept Jake comfortable during the journey. The fusion engines were loud and inefficient compared to the silent drives used by other species. Even the life support systems were basic, recycling air and water through mechanical filters instead of the molecular converters that advanced civilizations preferred. But Jake knew something about his ship that the aliens did not understand. Every system had been built by human hands using human knowledge gained over centuries of trial and error. The hull plating was not just steel, but dozens of different alloys layered and welded by craftsmen who understood how metals behaved under stress. The engines were not just functional, but carefully tuned by engineers who could feel when the fusion reaction was running perfectly. As Jake approached the first asteroid, he did something that no other species had done in the Kepler 442 system for over 1,000 years. He put on an environment suit and prepared to actually land on the rock's surface. The other delegates conducted their surveys from orbit using sensors and scanners, but humans still believed in getting their hands dirty. The asteroid was roughly spherical and about 2 kilometers across. Its surface was scarred by millions of years of impacts from smaller rocks and cosmic radiation. Early scans had shown it contained iron and carbon in roughly equal amounts, along with traces of other common elements, nothing that advanced civilizations would consider valuable. Jake landed his shuttle in a flat crater and stepped outside. The asteroid's gravity was so weak that each step sent him floating several meters before he came down again. He moved carefully across the rocky surface, examining the mineral formations with tools that would have been familiar to miners from Earth's past. A geological hammer, sample containers, and a simple spectrometer that could identify basic elements. What Jake found in the first hour changed everything he thought he knew about the asteroid field. The iron was not ordinary iron, but contained trace amounts of isotopes that should not exist naturally. The carbon was formed into structures that suggested it had been subjected to pressures and temperatures found only in the cores of dying stars. Most interesting of all were tiny veins of elements that his spectrometer could not identify at all. Jake collected samples carefully, storing each one in a separate container with detailed notes about where it had been found. He worked methodically across the asteroid's surface, mapping the distribution of different materials and noting how they related to the rock's geological features. It took him 6 hours to complete a survey that alien technology could have done in minutes, but his results contained information that no orbital sensor could provide. Back aboard his shuttle, Jake began the real work. The New Frontier's laboratory was tiny compared to the research facilities aboard alien ships, but it had something they lacked: human metallurgical equipment designed to work with physical samples rather than energy signatures. A small furnace that could reach temperatures hot enough to melt any known metal. Crucibles made from ceramic compounds that could withstand incredible heat. And most importantly, tools that allowed him to work the metals by hand. Jake placed his first sample in the furnace and watched as it melted into a glowing liquid. The spectrometer readings were strange, showing elements that flickered in and out of existence as if they were not quite stable in normal space. When he added a small amount of ordinary earth iron to the mixture, something unexpected happened. The unknown elements stabilized, and the resulting alloy showed properties that defied everything Jake knew about metallurgy. He poured the molten metal into a simple mold and waited for it to cool. When he removed the small ingot and tested it, he discovered that it was lighter than aluminum, but stronger than the best steel Earth had ever produced. More tests revealed even stranger properties. The metal seemed to absorb energy directed at it and convert that energy into increased structural strength. Jake spent the next 3 days visiting other asteroids in Earth's territory. Each one contained similar strange elements, but in different combinations and concentrations. By the end of the week, he had produced a dozen different alloys, each with properties that would revolutionize materials science. One was completely resistant to energy weapons. Another could withstand temperatures that would vaporize ordinary matter. A third actually became harder when struck with physical force. While Jake worked in his tiny laboratory, the other species were making rapid progress with their orbital surveys. The Zephyrians had identified 17 prime mining locations in their territory and were already sending automated harvesters. The Karathi had begun landing their massive mining machines on the rocky planets they had claimed. The Vexani were positioning their atmospheric processors around the gas giants. All of them were confident that they had secured the best territories in the Kepler 442 system. The asteroid field given to Earth was clearly the least valuable region, containing nothing but common materials that any civilized species could find closer to home. They began to feel sorry for the primitive humans who had accepted such a poor deal. Jake continued his work without contacting the space station or reporting his discoveries to Earth. He knew that communications in the Kepler 442 system were monitored by all the major powers, and he was not ready to reveal what he had found. Instead, he focused on understanding the strange materials and learning how to work with them. The breakthrough came when Jake realized that the unknown elements were not actually unknown at all. They were familiar materials that had been transformed by conditions that existed only in this particular asteroid field. Billions of years ago, this region of space had been subjected to energies from a nearby supernova explosion. The radiation had changed the atomic structure of common elements in ways that created entirely new possibilities. But the real discovery was not the elements themselves. It was how they responded to traditional human metallurgical techniques. While other species had advanced beyond physical manipulation of materials, humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of working metal by hand. They understood how different alloys behaved under stress, how crystal structures could be modified through heating and cooling, and how trace elements could be combined to create materials with specific properties. Jake realized that what he held in his hands was not just better metal, it was the key to changing humanity's place in the galaxy forever. Jake spent 2 weeks perfecting his metallurgical techniques in the small laboratory aboard the New Frontier. Each day brought new discoveries as he learned to work with the transformed elements found in Earth's asteroid field. The furnace ran almost constantly, melting and remelting samples as Jake tested different combinations and heating methods. The work was methodical and careful, following principles that human metal workers had developed over thousands of years. Jake would heat a sample to precise temperatures, then cool it at specific rates to create different crystal structures. He would add tiny amounts of other elements and observe how they changed the alloy's properties. Most importantly, he would test each result by hand, feeling how the metal responded to stress and learning to recognize the subtle signs that indicated a perfect alloy. While Jake worked in isolation, the other species were celebrating their success in the Kepler 442 system. The Zephyrians had extracted more rare minerals in 2 weeks than they usually harvested in a year. Their crystalline mining ships sang with joy as they pulled precious metals from the asteroid belts using harmonic resonance fields. The Karathi were equally pleased with their progress on the rocky planets. Their massive mining machines had begun stripping away entire mountain ranges to reach the valuable ore deposits beneath. The machines worked day and night, protected by energy shields that could deflect any weapon in the known galaxy. The Vexani had positioned their atmospheric processors around 3 different gas giants and were already collecting rare gases that existed nowhere else in known space. Their biomechanical systems were perfectly adapted to the harsh conditions, and they anticipated profits that would fund their expansion into new territories. All 3 major powers had established permanent bases in their territories. These facilities were marvels of galactic engineering, with energy shields that could stop asteroids, weapons that could destroy attacking fleets, and life support systems that could sustain thousands of workers for years without resupply. The other, minor species had also claimed their shares of the Kepler 442 wealth. Mining stations and research outposts were appearing throughout the system as everyone rushed to extract maximum value from their territories. Trade ships were already carrying the first loads of rare materials back to homeworlds where they would be processed into advanced technologies. Earth's territory remained quiet. Jake's small shuttle was the only human presence in the asteroid field, and he had not requested any additional support or equipment. The alien delegates who remained on the Central Space Station began to wonder if humanity had simply given up on their claim. Perhaps they had realized that their primitive technology was not adequate for space mining on this scale. Some delegates felt genuinely sorry for the humans. The species that had given them access to galactic civilization began to consider offering technical assistance or more favorable trading arrangements. Others suggested that Earth's territory should be redistributed among the major powers since it was clearly not being used effectively. Jake was aware of these discussions through communications intercepts, but he did not respond to any attempts at contact. Instead, he focused on the final phase of his work. He had identified 12 different alloys that showed remarkable properties, but now he needed to determine which ones would be most effective for his purposes. The first alloy was incredibly strong but also very light. Jake had created ingots that weighed less than aluminum but could not be dented by hammers that would crush steel. When he tested the metal with laser-cutting tools, the beam simply reflected off the surface without leaving a mark. The second alloy had the strange property of absorbing energy directed at it. When Jake fired a plasma torch at a sample, the metal glowed brightly but did not melt. Instead, it seemed to drink the energy and become even stronger. Tests showed that the more energy was applied, the harder the alloy became. The third alloy was the most remarkable of all. It could withstand physical impacts that would shatter any known material. Jake had tested it with hammers, cutting tools, and even explosive charges. The metal showed no damage and actually seemed to become more resistant to further attacks with each impact. But Jake knew that having superior materials was only the first step. He also needed to demonstrate their effectiveness in a way that would convince the galactic powers to take humanity seriously. The formal signing ceremony for the mining rights was scheduled to take place in 1 week, and Jake planned to use that opportunity to reveal what Earth had really gained from their apparently worthless territory. Jake began preparing for the demonstration by creating 3 perfect examples of his best alloys. Each piece was carefully crafted to show off the unique properties of the material. He shaped them into simple bars that would be easy to test, but he also made sure that each one represented the highest quality work that human metallurgy could achieve. The bars looked ordinary to casual observation. They were smooth and straight, with a subtle shine that suggested good quality metal but nothing extraordinary. Jake had deliberately avoided making them look exotic or alien. He wanted the focus to be on their performance, not their appearance. While Jake prepared his demonstration materials, he also sent a single message to Earth. The communication was brief and coded in a way that would not attract attention from the monitoring systems used by other species. To anyone intercepting the message, it would appear to be a routine status report from a mining survey team. But the message contained detailed specifications for the alloys Jake had discovered, along with instructions for reproducing his metallurgical techniques. Within days, human scientists and engineers across Earth were working to understand and improve upon Jake's discoveries. Research facilities that had been studying basic materials science suddenly found themselves at the forefront of a technological revolution. The response from Earth was equally brief and coded. Additional human ships were being prepared for departure to the Kepler 442 system, but they would not arrive until after the formal signing ceremony. Jake would have to handle the demonstration alone, with only his 3 metal bars and his knowledge of what they could do. As the day of the ceremony approached, Jake made his final preparations. He cleaned and polished the demonstration bars until they gleamed. He reviewed his notes on their properties and practiced explaining their capabilities in simple terms that other species would understand. Most importantly, he prepared himself mentally for what was about to happen. Jake knew that his demonstration would change everything. The balance of power that had existed in the galaxy for thousands of years was about to shift. And it would shift because one human had been patient enough to examine some ordinary-looking rocks with tools that other species considered obsolete. The irony was not lost on him, but he took no satisfaction in it. He was simply doing his job the way humans had always done their jobs, carefully and thoroughly, until the work was done right. The grand ceremony hall of the space station had been transformed for the formal signing of the mining rights agreements. Flags and symbols from dozens of worlds hung from the high ceiling, creating a colorful display that represented the diversity of galactic civilization. Each major species had been given a section of the hall that was decorated according to their cultural preferences and environmental needs. The Zephyrian section resonated with harmonic crystals that created beautiful music when touched by the station's air circulation system. Their delegates wore ceremonial robes made from living crystal that shifted colors as they moved. The sound of their voices created complex melodies that other species found both beautiful and slightly hypnotic. The Karathi section was kept warmer than the rest of the hall, with heating elements built into the floor and walls. Their representatives wore polished scale armor that had been crafted by master smiths on their homeworld. Each piece was a work of art that also served as a display of military might, showing potential enemies what Karathi warriors looked like when prepared for battle. The Vexani section featured vertical surfaces where the insect delegates could hang in their preferred positions. Their biomechanical suits were marvels of living technology that adapted constantly to changing conditions. The suits themselves were representatives of Vexani science, demonstrating their ability to blend organic and mechanical systems into perfect harmony. Dozens of other species filled the remaining sections of the hall. Each group had brought their finest ceremonial clothing, their most impressive technology displays, and their most important leaders. The atmosphere was festive but also tense, as everyone knew that this ceremony would establish the power structure in the Kepler 442 system for generations to come. Jake entered the hall, wearing the same simple gray worksuit he had worn throughout the negotiations. He carried a small metal case that looked plain and unremarkable compared to the elaborate displays surrounding him. Several delegates noticed his arrival and pointed him out to their companions, often with amused comments about human simplicity. The ceremony began with speeches from the leaders of each major species. The Zephyrian Prime Harmonist spoke about the ancient right of advanced civilizations to claim the resources they could best utilize. Her voice created patterns of sound that were simultaneously argument and art, convincing listeners through beauty as much as logic. The Korathi war leader spoke about strength and the natural order that gave the most powerful species the right to rule. His words were accompanied by displays of military power, with holographic projections showing the devastating capabilities of Korathi weapons and the victories they had won across the galaxy. The Vexani Hive Coordinator spoke about efficiency and the logical distribution of resources according to each species' proven abilities. Her presentation included detailed calculations that demonstrated how their proposed territorial divisions would maximize the extraction of valuable materials, while minimizing conflict. Each speech was followed by a demonstration of the species' capabilities. The Zephyrians showed how their harmonic mining technology could extract precious metals from asteroids without leaving any waste behind. They dissolved a sample asteroid with sound waves and separated the resulting materials into perfectly pure elements. The Korathi demonstrated their heavy mining equipment by creating a holographic simulation of their planetary operations. The massive machines could strip mine entire continents, while their military forces provided security against any possible threat. The simulation showed mountains being reduced to dust in minutes. The Vexani displayed their atmospheric processing, technology with a working model that extracted rare gases from a sample of planetary atmosphere. Their biomechanical systems worked with perfect precision, separating molecules that other technologies could not distinguish. When Earth's turn came, the hall fell silent with curiosity and anticipation. Many delegates were genuinely interested to see what the primitive humans would present. Others were simply waiting politely for the ceremony to continue with more impressive demonstrations. Jake walked to the presentation platform carrying his small metal case. He placed it on the demonstration table and opened it to reveal 3 simple metal bars. They were approximately the size of standard ingots, with smooth surfaces that reflected the hall's lights. To the assembled delegates, they looked like examples of basic metallurgy that any industrial civilization could produce. Jake lifted the first bar and held it up for everyone to see. The metal was obviously lightweight, as he could handle it easily with one hand, but beyond that it appeared completely ordinary. No energy signatures registered on the station's sensors. No exotic materials showed up on the passive scanners that constantly monitored the hall for security purposes. He placed the bar back on the table and stepped away from the platform. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and calm, without the dramatic flourishes that other delegates had used during their presentations. The silence that followed Jake's simple statement was filled with confusion and barely contained laughter. Several delegates exchanged glances that clearly said they thought the human had lost his mind. How could simple metal bars represent any kind of advancement over the energy weapons and force field technology that had defined galactic civilization for thousands of years? The Zephyrian Prime Harmonist was the first to respond. Her crystalline form sparkled with amusement as she gestured toward one of her honor guards. The warrior that stepped forward carried a harmonic disruptor, a weapon that could shatter molecular bonds with precisely tuned sound waves. The device was considered one of the most elegant and destructive personal weapons in the galaxy. Jake nodded his approval and stepped further back from the demonstration table. The Zephyrian warrior raised his weapon and aimed it at the first metal bar. The hall's environmental systems automatically adjusted to protect the delegates from the weapon's effects, creating force fields that would contain any debris or energy. Discharge. The harmonic disruptor fired with a sound like crystal wind chimes being struck by lightning. The energy beam that emerged was invisible to most species, but monitoring equipment showed that it carried enough power to reduce a small building to its component atoms. The weapon that had ended wars and toppled governments was now focused on a simple piece of human metal. What happened next changed everything the assembled delegates thought they knew about technology, warfare, and the balance of power in the galaxy. The harmonic beam struck the metal bar and simply stopped. No explosion, no scattering of debris, no visible effect at all. The energy that should have destroyed the target seemed to vanish into the metal as if it had never existed. The Zephyrian warrior increased the weapon's power level, pouring more energy into the beam than had ever been used in a single sustained burst. The disruptor began to overheat from the unprecedented power draw, but still the metal bar showed no damage. Instead, it began to glow with a soft light that grew brighter as more energy was absorbed. When the warrior finally stopped firing, the metal bar sat unchanged on the demonstration table. The weapon that could destroy cities had been completely ineffective against a piece of metal that looked like it had been forged in a primitive workshop. The implications of what everyone had just witnessed began to sink in slowly, creating a silence that felt heavier than the metal itself. The silence in the ceremony hall stretched on for long seconds as the assembled delegates tried to process what they had just witnessed. The Zephyrian warrior stood frozen with his harmonic disruptor still aimed at the metal bar, unable to believe that his most powerful weapon had been completely ineffective. The Prime Harmonist's crystalline form had stopped its usual musical resonance, creating an eerie quiet from the normally melodic delegation. Jake remained calm and patient, waiting for the implications of the demonstration to settle in the minds of the observers. He had expected this reaction and knew that what they had seen was only the beginning. The metal bar that had absorbed the harmonic energy was now glowing with stored power, but its structure remained completely unchanged. The Korathi war leader was the first to break the silence. His scaled face showed a mixture of disbelief and growing anger as he realized that everything he thought he knew about military superiority might be wrong. He gestured sharply to one of his elite guards, a warrior whose plasma cannon had never failed to destroy its target. The Korathi soldier stepped forward with confidence that was beginning to crack around the edges. His weapon was a masterpiece of energy manipulation technology that could generate temperatures hot enough to melt through the hull of a battleship. The plasma cannon had been tested against every known material in the galaxy, and nothing had ever survived a direct hit. The war leader spoke in his people's harsh language, commanding the soldier to demonstrate why Korathi weapons were feared throughout the galaxy. The soldier raised his cannon and took careful aim at the second metal bar that Jake had placed on the demonstration table. The plasma cannon fired with a roar that shook the entire ceremony hall. A stream of superheated plasma erupted from the weapon, carrying enough energy to vaporize a small starship. The bolt of burning gas struck the metal bar with the force of a small star, creating a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded several delegates. When the light faded and the energy discharge cleared, the second metal bar sat exactly where Jake had placed it. The plasma that should have reduced it to vapor had simply splashed against the metal surface like water hitting stone. The bar was not even warm to the touch, having somehow redirected all of that devastating energy without showing any sign of damage. The Karathi soldier fired again, then again, pouring blast after blast of plasma into the stubborn piece of metal. The weapon began to overheat from the sustained fire, but the soldier continued until the cannon's power cells were completely drained. When he finally stopped, the metal bar remained perfect and unmarked, while his weapon sparked and smoked from the unprecedented energy expenditure. The war leader's anger was now mixed with something that looked very much like fear. If Karathi plasma weapons could not damage this strange human metal, then the military superiority that his people had enjoyed for centuries was suddenly in question. He looked at Jake with new respect and growing concern about what other surprises Earth might have prepared. The Vexani Hive coordinator watched these demonstrations with the calculating intelligence that made her species such effective strategists. She could see that the humans had developed something that fundamentally changed the rules of galactic civilization, but she needed to understand exactly how far this advantage extended. The Vexani coordinator signaled to her finest warrior, AI shock trooper, whose biomechanical enhancements made him one of the most dangerous close combat fighters in known space. His living armor could adapt to any environment, and his razor-sharp mandibles could cut through materials that energy weapons could not affect. The shock trooper approached the third metal bar with the fluid grace that made Vexani warriors so deadly. His mandibles extended to their full cutting length, revealing biomechanical edges that were sharper than any blade and harder than the strongest armor. These weapons had sliced through battleship hulls and enemy fortifications that had resisted orbital bombardment. The warrior struck the metal bar with a precision that came from thousands of hours of training and dozens of successful battles. His mandibles, moving faster than most species could follow, hit the metal with enough force to cut a starship in half. The impact sent vibrations through the station's hull that could be felt in sections hundreds of meters away. When the shock trooper stepped back, the delegates could see that his biomechanical mandibles were shattered. Pieces of the cutting edges lay scattered on the floor around the demonstration table, while the metal bar showed no sign of impact. Not even a scratch marked its surface, where weapons that could slice through anything had struck with devastating force. The warrior stared at his broken mandibles in shock and disbelief. These were not just weapons, but part of his living body, biomechanical systems that had been enhanced and perfected over his entire lifetime. The idea that they could be destroyed by contact with a simple piece of metal was beyond his ability to comprehend. Jake stepped forward and collected his 3 metal bars, returning them to their case with the same calm movements he had used throughout the demonstration. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as he closed the case and prepared to leave the platform. The implications of what they had witnessed were staggering. Humanity had developed materials that were completely immune to the 3 most powerful types of weapons in galactic civilization. Energy weapons, plasma cannons, and physical attacks had all proven useless against these simple-looking metal bars. But the demonstration had revealed something even more important than just superior materials. It had shown that humans approached technology in a fundamentally different way than other species. While the galaxy had focused on developing more powerful weapons and more exotic energy sources, humans had perfected the basic science of making better metal. The ceremony hall erupted into chaos as delegates from dozens of species began shouting questions and demands for explanations. Some wanted to know how the metals were made. Others demanded access to the technology. Several species immediately began discussing alliance proposals and trade agreements that would give them access to these revolutionary materials. Through all the noise and confusion, Jake remained quietly at the demonstration table. He waited for the initial shock to wear off before speaking again, his voice cutting through the chaos with the same calm authority he had shown throughout the negotiations. What followed was the fastest and most complete reversal of a galactic treaty in recorded history. Every major species suddenly wanted to renegotiate the mining rights agreements. They offered Earth better territories, larger shares of the valuable resources, and military alliances that would have been unthinkable just hours before. But Jake had learned something important during his weeks of quiet observation. He had learned that the most powerful position in any negotiation was the one held by the party that did not need to make a deal. Earth's asteroid field, which everyone had dismissed as worthless, had just proven to be the most valuable territory in the entire Kepler 442 system. The mining rights agreements were signed as originally negotiated, with Earth keeping its small collection of ordinary-looking asteroids. But everyone in the galaxy now knew that those asteroids contained the key to a new age of technology, and that the quiet human who had discovered their secrets was not someone to be ignored. 3 months after the ceremony that changed everything, the Kepler 442 system looked completely different than anyone had expected. The major powers that had claimed the richest territories were still extracting valuable materials, but their confident dominance had been replaced by nervous uncertainty about what humanity might do next. Jake Morrison had returned to his work with the same quiet focus that had characterized his original survey. His small shuttle, the New Frontier, continued to move slowly between the asteroids that made up Earth's territory. To outside observers, he appeared to be conducting the same primitive surveys that had marked his first weeks in the system. But the reality was far more complex. Jake was not just studying the asteroid field anymore. He was designing and building humanity's first permanent installation in the Kepler 442 system, using techniques and materials that no other species could understand or replicate. The construction process was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of the energy beams and force field manipulators that other species used for space construction, Jake worked with simple tools and basic machinery. He cut metal by hand, welded joints with elementary torches, and assembled structures, using techniques that would have been familiar to builders from Earth's industrial age. But the materials he worked with were anything but primitive. Each piece of the growing station was made from alloys that Jake had perfected during his months of research. The hull plating could absorb energy weapons without damage. The structural beams were stronger than anything in the galactic database. The connecting joints would not break under any force that conventional technology could apply. The other species watched this construction with fascination and growing concern. Their advanced sensors could detect every move Jake made, but they could not understand how his simple techniques were producing results that their own technology could not match. The station looked ordinary, even crude by galactic standards, but it was clearly indestructible. The Zephyrians were the first to attempt direct intervention. Their crystalline ships approached Earth's territory with what they claimed were peaceful intentions, offering to help with the construction using their advanced harmonic engineering. They positioned their vessels just outside the boundary of Earth's claim and began broadcasting resonance patterns designed to assist with large-scale construction projects. Jake responded by continuing his work without acknowledgement of the Zephyrian presence. When their harmonic beams reached his half-completed station, the metal absorbed the energy just as the demonstration bars had done during the ceremony. The construction materials actually became stronger under the influence of the Zephyrian technology, but Jake gained no visible benefit from their assistance. The Zephyrians interpreted this as either supreme confidence or deliberate insult. Their Prime Harmonist sent a formal communication requesting permission to inspect the human construction methods. The message was polite but carried undertones that suggested their patience was not unlimited. Jake's response was brief and professional. Earth appreciated the Zephyrian interest but preferred to handle their construction projects independently. The message included detailed specifications of Earth's territorial boundaries and a reminder that the mining rights agreements guaranteed each species exclusive control over their assigned areas. The Karathi reaction was more direct and threatening. Their war leader dispatched a battle group to patrol the edges of Earth's territory, claiming that the unusual energy readings from the human construction site posed a potential security threat to other operations in the system. The reptilian warships were armed with the most powerful plasma cannons in their fleet, weapons that could destroy small moons. Jake responded to this military presence by installing defensive systems on his growing station, but instead of energy, shields, or missile launchers, he mounted simple metal barriers around the critical areas. The barriers looked like nothing more than thick plates welded to the station's hull, but observers noted that they were made from the same mysterious alloys that had proven immune to weapons testing. The Karathi war leader demanded an explanation for these defensive preparations. His communications became increasingly aggressive as he insisted that Earth was violating the spirit of the mining agreements by building military installations. The implied threat was clear. If humanity was preparing for war, the Karathi were ready to provide one. Jake's response was to invite the Karathi to test his defenses against their weapons. The invitation was delivered in the same calm, professional tone he had used throughout the negotiations, but the implications were staggering. He was essentially challenging the most militarily powerful species in the galaxy to attack his unfinished station. The Vexani watched these exchanges with their typical calculating patience. The Hive coordinator understood that something fundamental had changed in the galactic balance of power, and she was determined to position her species advantageously for whatever came next. Rather than making threats or demands, she sent scientific observers to study the human construction methods from a distance. The Vexani analysis teams used every sensor and scanning technology in their arsenal, but they could not determine how Jake's simple techniques were producing such extraordinary results. Their reports described metallurgical processes that appeared primitive, but created materials with properties that violated established laws of physics. More disturbing to the Vexani analysts was their growing realization that the human approach to technology was completely different from anything they had encountered. Other species built on complexity, adding more advanced systems to achieve better performance. Humans seemed to build on simplicity, perfecting basic techniques until they achieved results that surpassed the most sophisticated alternatives. As Jake's station neared completion, other species in the Kepler 442 system began to modify their own operations. Mining installations that had been defended by energy shields were reinforced with physical armor. Ships that had relied on advanced weapon systems began carrying backup equipment based on more traditional technologies. The changes were subtle but significant. For the first time in thousands of years, galactic civilization was reconsidering its fundamental approach to engineering and defense. The possibility that primitive techniques might be superior to advanced technology was forcing everyone to examine their basic assumptions about progress and development. Jake completed his station exactly 4 months after the mining rights ceremony. The facility was not large by galactic standards, capable of supporting perhaps 100 workers, but it represented something entirely new in space construction. Every system was designed around human metallurgical principles, using materials and techniques that other species could not duplicate. The station's first test came when a small asteroid, knocked from its orbit by mining operations elsewhere in the system, struck the facility at high speed. The impact carried enough energy to destroy most space installations, but Jake's station absorbed the collision without damage. The asteroid itself shattered against the hull plating, leaving the human facility completely unharmed. This incident was observed by monitoring systems throughout the Kepler 442 system. The casual invulnerability that Jake's station had demonstrated sent a clear message to every species in the galaxy. Humanity had not just developed better materials. They had created a new standard for what was possible in space engineering. The first human supply ships arrived 1 week later, carrying personnel and equipment to begin full-scale operations in Earth's territory. But these were not the primitive vessels that other species expected. The new ships were built using Jake's metallurgical discoveries, combining human engineering traditions with materials that redefined the possible. The arrival of the human fleet in the Kepler 442 system marked the beginning of the most significant shift in galactic politics since the formation of the Trade Consortium. 12 ships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's territorial claim, moving with the steady determination that had become humanity's signature in space. The ships themselves were a shock to observers throughout the system. Instead of the sleek, energy-efficient designs favored by advanced civilizations, the human vessels looked like they had been built in orbital shipyards using traditional construction methods. Heavy plates of metal were welded together in patterns that seemed almost crude compared to the flowing lines of Zephyrian crystal ships or the biomechanical curves of Vexani vessels. But appearances were deceiving. Every plate, every joint, every structural element of the human ships was made from alloys that Jake Morrison had perfected during his months of research. The vessels that looked primitive were actually more durable than anything else in known space, built to withstand forces that would tear apart conventional starships. The lead ship in the human fleet was the Vancouver, commanded by Captain Lisa Chen, a veteran of Earth's deep space exploration program. She had volunteered for this mission specifically because of her experience with long-duration operations in hostile environments. What she had not expected was to find herself at the center of a galactic crisis that threatened to remake the balance of power among the stars. Captain Chen's first action upon arriving in the Kepler 442 system was to establish communication with Jake Morrison at his newly completed station. The conversation was brief and professional, but it confirmed what observers throughout the system had begun to suspect. Humanity was not just conducting mining operations. They were establishing a permanent presence using technology that other species could not match or counter. The human fleet proceeded directly to Jake's station without acknowledging the various alien vessels that moved to intercept or escort them. Zephyrian ships took positions that would allow them to observe the human operations closely. Karathi warships established patrol patterns that brought them as close to Earth's territory as the treaties allowed. Vexani scouts deployed sensor packages designed to monitor every aspect of human activity. All of these efforts proved futile. The human ships simply ignored the attention they were receiving and continued with their planned operations. When they reached Jake's station, They began unloading personnel and equipment with the methodical efficiency that had become humanity's trademark in space. The unloading process revealed more surprises for the watching aliens. The cargo holds of the human ships contained not just supplies and workers, but entire manufacturing systems designed to produce the revolutionary alloys that Jake had discovered. Within days of the fleet's arrival, the human station was producing its own construction materials and expanding its capabilities. The Zephyrian response was swift and decisive. Prime Harmonist Crystalla convened an emergency session of the Trade Consortium's governing council, demanding an immediate review of the mining rights agreements. She argued that Earth had violated the spirit of the treaties by concealing the true value of their territorial claim and by developing military-grade technologies that threatened the stability of galactic civilization. The council session was held aboard the Central Space Station, with representatives from all major species participating through holographic projections. The atmosphere was tense, as each delegation struggled to understand the implications of humanity's technological breakthrough and to position their own people advantageously for whatever came next. Crystalla's presentation was a masterpiece of Zephyrian diplomatic art, combining logical arguments with harmonic patterns that influence the emotional responses of other species. She claimed that Earth's development of invulnerable materials constituted a threat to the peaceful balance that had maintained galactic stability for thousands of years. The Karathi war leader supported the Zephyrian position with his typical directness. His scaled features showed barely controlled aggression as he argued that any species capable of developing such advanced defensive technologies must also be working on offensive weapons of similar capability. He demanded that Earth be required to share their metallurgical secrets with all members of the Trade Consortium or face military action to prevent them from achieving total superiority. The Vexani Hive coordinator presented a more nuanced analysis, but her conclusions were equally concerning. Her people's calculations suggested that humanity's technological advantage could render all existing military and economic balances meaningless within a few decades. If other species could not develop equivalent capabilities, they would become completely dependent on human goodwill for their survival. Dozens of minor species added their voices to the debate, some supporting immediate action against Earth, while others argued for a more cautious approach. Several delegations proposed offering humanity membership in various alliance structures in exchange for access to their advanced materials. Others suggested trade agreements that would give all species access to human technology in return for resources and political concessions. Through all of these discussions, Earth's representative remained silent. Jake Morrison attended the session via holographic projection from his station in the asteroid field, but he said nothing as the other species debated humanity's fate. His calm presence was somehow more unsettling than angry words would have been, suggesting a confidence that made other delegates increasingly nervous. When the debate finally ended and the council called for Earth's response, Jake's answer was brief and devastating in its simplicity. Humanity would continue its operations in the Kepler 442 system according to the terms of the mining rights agreements that all parties had signed. Earth had no intention of sharing its technological discoveries with species that had spent the entire session discussing ways to force compliance through threats and coercion. The reaction to Jake's statement was immediate and chaotic. Several species demanded military action to compel Earth's cooperation. Others proposed economic sanctions designed to isolate humanity from galactic trade networks. A few delegations walked out of the session entirely, presumably to consult with their home governments about how to respond to this unprecedented crisis. But as the various species planned their responses to humanity's challenge, events in the Kepler 442 system were moving faster than galactic politics could accommodate. The human fleet had completed its unloading operations and was beginning the next phase of Earth's expansion into space. Captain Chen's ships dispersed throughout Earth's territory, establishing mining stations on asteroids that preliminary surveys had identified as containing the transformed elements that made Jake's alloys possible. Each station was built using the same techniques Jake had pioneered, creating a network of facilities that were completely immune to conventional attack. More importantly, the human stations began producing not just raw materials, but finished products. Within weeks of the fleet's arrival, Earth's territory in the Kepler 442 system was manufacturing ship components, construction materials, and industrial equipment using metallurgical techniques that no other species could replicate. The SA's economic implications were staggering. Humanity was becoming self-sufficient in space at a rate that should have taken decades or centuries. Their ability to produce indestructible materials meant that their infrastructure investments would last indefinitely, giving them enormous advantages in any long-term competition with other species. The first test of these new realities came when a Karathi battle group, acting without explicit authorization from their government, moved to blockade one of the new human mining stations. The reptilian warships took positions that would prevent any ships from reaching or leaving the facility, effectively cutting it off from the rest of Earth's operations. The human response was immediate and decisive. Captain Chen's flagship, the Vancouver, moved directly toward the Karathi blockade without slowing or attempting to negotiate. The reptilian ships opened fire with plasma cannons that could destroy most vessels with a single hit, but their weapons proved as ineffective against human ships as they had been against Jake's demonstration materials. The Vancouver passed through the Karathi battle line without taking any damage, its hull absorbing the plasma fire and actually becoming stronger from the energy input. The human ship did not return fire or make any aggressive moves. It simply continued to its destination, demonstrating that the blockade was completely ineffective against vessels built with the new human technology. 1 year after Jake Morrison had first stepped onto an asteroid in the Kepler 442 system, the galaxy was learning to live with a new reality. The balance of power that had existed for thousands of years had shifted permanently, not through conquest or war, but through the quiet determination of humans who simply refused to accept that good enough was ever actually good enough. The human presence in the Kepler 442 system had grown from one man with a small shuttle to a network of installations that produced materials and technologies beyond anything the galaxy had previously imagined. Jake's original station had become the center of a research complex where human metallurgists worked alongside scientists from Earth to push the boundaries of what was possible with transformed matter. But the real revolution was not happening in space. It was happening in workshops and laboratories across dozens of worlds as other species began to send their brightest students to Earth to learn the human approach to engineering and materials science. The lessons they learned challenged everything they thought they knew about technology and progress. The Zephyrian student, who had spent 6 months in a human foundry, returned home with a completely different understanding of how matter could be manipulated. Instead of using harmonic resonance to impose changes from outside, she had learned to work with the internal structure of metals, guiding them toward configurations that enhance their natural properties. Her first project after returning to the crystal cities of Zephyria was a building that sang with perfect harmony while being stronger than any structure her people had ever created. the Karathi engineer who had apprenticed himself to a human, Blacksmith brought back techniques that revolutionized his people's approach to armor and weapons. By combining traditional Karathi metallurgy with human patience and attention to detail, he created personal protection that was lighter and more effective than anything in their military arsenal. More importantly, he taught his people that strength came not from using the most advanced tools available, but from understanding the materials deeply enough to bring out their best qualities. The Vexani researcher who had studied human manufacturing methods returned to her hive with insights that changed how her people thought about the relationship between biological and mechanical systems. She discovered that the human approach to metallurgy could be applied to biomechanical engineering, creating living machines that were more durable and efficient than anything the Vexani had previously developed. These individual successes began to spread through galactic civilization like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Species that had competed for thousands of years by developing more exotic energy sources and more complex technologies suddenly found themselves questioning whether they had been moving in the right direction. The human demonstration that simple techniques could produce superior results forced everyone to reconsider their basic assumptions about progress. Jake Morrison, the man whose quiet discoveries had started this revolution, continued his work in the Kepler 442 system with the same methodical approach that had characterized his original survey. He spent his days moving between the various human installations, examining new material samples and refining the techniques that transformed ordinary elements into extraordinary alloys. But Jake's work had evolved beyond simple metallurgy. He was now studying the fundamental principles that made the transformation possible, trying to understand why certain combinations of elements and specific manufacturing techniques produced results that seemed to violate the established laws of physics. His research was leading him toward discoveries that would make his original alloys seem primitive by comparison. The breakthrough came when Jake realized that the transformed elements in the Kepler 442 asteroids were not actually changed in their basic nature. Instead, they had been organized in ways that allowed their fundamental properties to express themselves more fully. The radiation from the ancient supernova had not created new physics. It had simply revealed possibilities that had always existed but had never been properly explored. This understanding opened up entirely new approaches to materials science. If elements could be guided toward configurations that enhanced their natural capabilities, then the same principles could be applied to materials found anywhere in the galaxy. The Kepler 442 asteroids were not unique sources of exotic matter. They were examples of what could be achieved when someone took the time to understand materials at the deepest possible level. Jake began sharing this knowledge with the human researchers who had joined him in the asteroid field, and they in turn began teaching the principles to the alien students who came to learn human techniques. The knowledge spread slowly but steadily, carrying with it a new philosophy of technology that emphasized understanding over complexity and patience over speed. The political implications of this spreading knowledge were profound. Species that had maintained their power through control of advanced technologies found their advantages eroding as others learned to achieve similar results through different methods. The Trade Consortium's traditional hierarchy began to break down as smaller species discovered that human techniques could level the playing field in ways that no amount of military force had ever accomplished. The response from the established powers was predictable but ultimately futile. Attempts to restrict access to human knowledge failed because the techniques could be learned by anyone willing to invest the time and effort required. Military threats proved meaningless against opponents who could build infrastructure that was immune to conventional weapons. Economic pressure had no effect on civilizations that were becoming self-sufficient through superior manufacturing capabilities. Some species adapted to the new reality better than others. The Zephyrians, with their natural appreciation for harmony and precision, found that human metallurgical principles complemented their existing technologies beautifully. They became some of the most successful practitioners of the hybrid techniques that combined human patience with Zephyrian harmonic control. The Karathi struggled more with the transition. Their culture emphasized dominance through superior force, and it was difficult for them to accept that the most effective strength came from careful attention to fundamental principles rather than overwhelming firepower. But even they eventually began to see the advantages of building weapons and armor that became more effective over time rather than wearing out through use. The Vexani adapted quickly, as was typical for their species. They approached human techniques with the same analytical precision they brought to everything else, systematically cataloging and improving upon the knowledge they gained. Within months of beginning serious study of human methods, they were producing innovations that impressed even their teachers. But the most significant changes were happening among the smaller species that had previously been excluded from the highest levels of galactic civilization. With access to human techniques, they could build infrastructure and develop technologies that rivaled anything the major powers possessed. The galaxy was becoming more democratic, not through political reform, but through the simple reality that superior techniques could not be monopolized. Captain Lisa Chen, now commanding a fleet of 12 ships that represented the most advanced vessels in known space, watched these changes with a mixture of pride and concern. Humanity had given the galaxy something precious, but with that gift came responsibility. The techniques that Jake Morrison had discovered could be used to build a more peaceful and prosperous civilization, but they could also be turned toward destructive purposes if the wrong people learned to use them effectively. Jake himself seemed unconcerned about such possibilities. When Captain Chen asked him about the risks of sharing human knowledge so freely, his response was characteristically simple and direct. The techniques worked best when they were used with patience and careful attention to detail. Anyone who tried to rush the process or use the knowledge for purely destructive purposes would find that the materials themselves resisted such applications. It was, Jake explained, a form of built-in safety mechanism. The same patience and respect for fundamentals that made the techniques effective also tended to develop wisdom and restraint in those who practiced them seriously. Someone who truly understood how to create perfect steel would also understand why that steel should be used to build rather than destroy. The revolution that Jake Morrison had begun continued to spread throughout the galaxy, carried by students who returned home with new knowledge and new ways of thinking about technology and progress. It was a quiet revolution, marked not by dramatic battles or sudden political upheavals, but by the gradual recognition that the most advanced technologies were often the ones that perfected simple principles, rather than pursuing exotic complexity, and in the workshops and foundries that were appearing on worlds throughout galactic civilization, the sound of hammers on anvils could be heard once again as sentient beings of dozens of different species learned the ancient human art of making tomorrow's materials better than today's, one careful strike at a time.